Princess Dewdrop and the Lost Spring. The Kingdom of Blossoms was a place of perpetual beauty. Every season painted the land in a symphony of colors, vivid reds, soft yellows, and calming blues, all blooming under a sun that always seemed to smile. At its heart was Princess Dewdrop, a kind and curious child who loved the flowers that surrounded her home. She was named for the delicate droplets that sparkled on petals each morning, a reminder of how magical and fleeting nature could be. One day, as winter melted into spring, something strange happened. The flowers didn't bloom. The vibrant fields of tulips and daisies remained stubbornly gray, their buds tightly closed. The once cheerful trees stood bare, their branches stretched out like skeletal fingers. The usual hum of bees and the chirping of birds were absent, leaving an unsettling silence across the land. Dewdrop stood on the balcony of her crystal palace, gazing out at the colorless fields with worry etched on her face. "Why aren't the flowers blooming?" she asked her governess, Lady Poppy, who stood nearby. Lady Poppy, a wise and elderly woman with a crown of wildflowers in her hair, looked troubled. "The cycle of seasons is sacred, Princess. Something must be wrong if spring hasn't arrived." Dewdrop's small hands gripped the railing. "We must do something. We can't just wait." Lady Poppy hesitated. "There are old stories, whispers of an ancient force that controls the seasons, but they are only tales." Dewdrop's heart leaped. "Then we must find this force. If spring has been stolen, I will bring it back." Despite Lady Poppy's protests, Dewdrop insisted on beginning her quest. She gathered her courage, donned her favorite cloak, and packed a satchel with necessities: a flask of nectar, a piece of sun-kissed bread, and a silver charm her mother had given her, a charm said to protect its wearer from harm. With Lady Poppy's reluctant blessing, Dewdrop set out. Her journey began in the still, frozen meadows where the remains of winter lingered like stubborn guests who refused to leave. The ground was hard underfoot, and the air was crisp and biting. As she wandered, Dewdrop called out to the fields, the trees, and even the wind. "Where has spring gone?" she asked, but only silence answered. At the edge of the meadow, Dewdrop encountered her first guide, a robin perched on a low branch. Its feathers were ruffled, and its eyes darted nervously. "Oh, little bird," Dewdrop pleaded, "do you know where spring has gone?" The robin chirped softly and fluttered down to the ground, hopping toward a narrow path that led into the enchanted forest. Dewdrop followed, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and fear. The forest was darker than she had imagined, its canopy so thick that only faint beams of sunlight broke through. The trees whispered as the wind stirred their branches, and strange shadows danced on the mossy ground. Yet Dewdrop pressed on, determined to find answers. Deeper into the forest, Dewdrop encountered an unexpected ally, a mischievous fox with fur as white as snow. It darted out from behind a tree, startling her. "Lost, little princess?" the fox asked, its voice sly but not unkind. "I'm looking for spring," Dewdrop said firmly. "Do you know where it is?" The fox tilted its head, its bright eyes gleaming. "Perhaps, but information isn't free." Dewdrop frowned. "I have no gold or jewels to give you." The fox smirked. "I don't want treasure. I want a story. Tell me something I've never heard before." Dewdrop thought for a moment. Then she told the fox the tale of her father's magical garden, where flowers bloomed in the shape of stars and the air was always filled with music. It was a story filled with wonder and heartache, as the garden had withered when her father passed away. The fox listened intently, its sly grin fading into something softer. "A fine story," it said when she finished. "For that I will help you." It explained that an ancient force named Frostbane, a towering ice giant, had stolen spring and locked it away in his icy fortress high in the Crystal Mountains. "Frostbane is angry," the fox said. "He despises the warmth and joy of spring. He believes winter is the only season the world should know." "How can I stop him?" Dewdrop asked, her voice small but steady. "You'll need the Bloomstone," the fox replied. "A powerful gem hidden deep in this forest. It can bring warmth and life to even the coldest of hearts." "Where can I find it?" Dewdrop asked eagerly. The fox's grin returned. "That, princess, is another story." With that, the fox bounded ahead, its snowy tail flicking as it led Dewdrop deeper into the forest, toward the next step in her journey. Though fear gnawed at the edges of her resolve, Dewdrop clutched the silver charm around her neck and whispered to herself, "I will not fail." The kingdom of blossoms needs me. As the shadows of the forest grew longer and the air colder, Dewdrop knew her adventure had only just begun. The forest grew darker and colder as Princess Dewdrop followed the snowy fox deeper into the enchanted forest. Its tail swished as it darted between trees, pausing occasionally to glance back and ensure she was keeping up. Dewdrop clutched her cloak tightly around her shoulders and shivered. The warmth of her kingdom seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an oppressive chill that made her breath visible in the icy air. Eventually, the fox stopped at the base of an ancient tree so large that its gnarled roots twisted into the ground like the arms of a giant. Its bark glimmered faintly as though dusted with frost. The fox sat down and motioned with its paw toward the tree. "The Bloomstone lies within," it said, its voice quieter now, as if the tree itself demanded respect. "But be warned, Princess, the tree will not yield its treasure so easily." Dewdrop hesitated, her gaze tracing the enormous trunk. "What do I need to do?" she asked. The fox tilted its head. "The tree is alive, little one. It guards the Bloomstone fiercely, for it is a treasure of great power. You must earn its trust by proving your heart is pure and your intentions are true." "But how?" Dewdrop pressed. The fox stood and flicked its tail. "That I cannot tell you. The tree will decide if you are worthy. Good luck, Princess." With that, the fox disappeared into the shadows, leaving Dewdrop alone. She approached the tree cautiously, her boots crunching softly on the frosted ground. As she reached out to touch the bark, a deep rumbling voice echoed around her. "Who dares disturb the guardian of the Bloomstone?" Dewdrop stumbled back, startled. "I am Princess Dewdrop of the Kingdom of Blossoms," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I seek the Bloomstone to bring back spring. My people are suffering, and I must save them." The tree seemed to consider her words. Its branches creaked and groaned as it shifted, and its bark rippled like the surface of a pond. "Spring has been lost," it said, "but why should I trust you to restore it? How do I know you will not use the Bloomstone for selfish gain as others before you have tried?" Dewdrop's eyes widened. "I would never," she cried. "The kingdom of blossoms depends on spring. Without it, the flowers will not bloom, and the bees will have no nectar. I only wish to save my home." The tree's voice softened, but it was still stern. "Words are easy, child. Show me your heart." Before Dewdrop could ask how, the ground beneath her began to glow. She gasped as swirling lights emerged, forming a shimmering portal. Without hesitation, she stepped into it, her determination outweighing her fear. She found herself standing in a field, but it was unlike any field she had ever seen. The flowers were wilted, their petals dull and lifeless. The sky was a bleak gray, and the air was heavy with sorrow. In the center of the field stood a young girl, sobbing softly as she knelt beside a withered rose bush. Dewdrop approached cautiously. "Hello," she said gently. The girl looked up, her tear-streaked face filled with despair. "The flowers are dying," she said, her voice trembling. "I've tried everything, but they won't grow." Dewdrop knelt beside her. "Why do you care so much about these flowers?" "They were my mother's garden," the girl replied. "She loved them more than anything. Now she's gone, and I failed to keep them alive." Dewdrop's heart ached for the girl. Without a second thought, she removed the silver charm from around her neck and placed it in the girl's hands. "Here," she said. "This charm has always brought me hope. Maybe it will help you, too." The girl's eyes widened. "But this is yours. Don't you need it?" Dewdrop smiled. "Hope grows when it is shared." As soon as the girl touched the charm, the field began to change. The flowers lifted their heads, their colors returning in vibrant bursts. The sky brightened, and a warm breeze swept through the field, carrying the scent of fresh blooms. The portal reappeared, and Dewdrop stepped through it, finding herself back at the ancient tree. Its bark glowed warmly, and its voice resonated with approval. "You have shown kindness and selflessness. You are worthy of the Bloomstone." From deep within the tree, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a gemstone the size of an apple. It shimmered with a kaleidoscope of colors, radiating warmth and light. Dewdrop carefully took the Bloomstone, her hands trembling as she cradled it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Use it wisely, Princess," the tree said. "Its power is great, but it is not infinite. Be brave, for your journey is not over." Dewdrop left the forest with the Bloomstone, its glow lighting her path. As she emerged into the open fields, she saw the snowy fox waiting for her. It eyed the gemstone with a mix of admiration and caution. "You've done well," it said, "but Frostbane will not give up spring without a fight." "I'll face him," Dewdrop replied firmly. "For my kingdom, I'll do whatever it takes." The fox nodded. "Then it's time to climb the Crystal Mountains. Be warned, Frostbane's fortress is guarded by an eternal blizzard. Only the warmth of the Bloomstone can protect you." Dewdrop gripped the Bloomstone tightly. "Then we'd better not waste any time." With the fox leading the way, Dewdrop began her ascent toward the towering peaks of the Crystal Mountains. The air grew colder with each step, and snowflakes swirled around her, but the Bloomstone's glow kept her warm and resolute. Though fear lingered in her heart, Dewdrop knew she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. For the Kingdom of Blossoms, for her people, and for the return of spring, she would stand against the ice giant. The journey up the Crystal Mountains was more treacherous than anything Princess Dewdrop had imagined. The icy winds howled like angry spirits, and the snow-covered paths seemed to shift beneath her feet. The Bloomstone in her hands glowed steadily, its warmth the only thing keeping the biting cold at bay. Beside her, the snowy fox bounded effortlessly through the snow, pausing occasionally to wait for her. As the hours passed, the blizzard grew stronger. Frost clung to Dewdrop's cloak, and her breaths came in short, misty bursts. The peaks of the Crystal Mountains loomed ever closer, sharp and foreboding against the gray sky. Finally, they reached the base of Frostbane's fortress. The fortress was carved directly into the mountain, its walls of jagged ice glinting like crystal swords. Massive icicles hung from the parapets, and the air crackled with a strange frozen energy. Dewdrop stared up at the imposing structure, her heart pounding. "Frostbane is inside," the fox said, its voice unusually serious. "Remember, Princess, the Bloomstone's power can melt even the coldest heart, but only if used wisely. Be brave." Dewdrop nodded, her small hands tightening around the Bloomstone. She pushed open the heavy frost-covered doors and stepped into the fortress. The interior was as cold and lifeless as the mountains outside. Ice-coated walls stretched high into shadowy ceilings, and frozen statues of animals and people lined the halls, their expressions locked in fear. Dewdrop's footsteps echoed eerily, each one a reminder of how alone she was. At the end of a long corridor, she entered a vast chamber. In its center sat Frostbane, the ice giant. He was massive, his icy form towering over her like a glacier. His skin shimmered like frozen glass, and his eyes burned with a cold, piercing blue light. Around him, chains of ice bound a swirling orb of green and gold light, spring itself, trapped and flickering weakly. Frostbane's voice boomed, shaking the walls. "Who dares enter my domain?" Dewdrop swallowed her fear and stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "I am Princess Dewdrop of the Kingdom of Blossoms. I have come to free spring and restore it to my people." The ice giant laughed, a deep, thunderous sound that echoed like breaking ice. "Foolish child, spring is mine now. I will no longer allow its warmth to weaken my winter. Leave before you share its fate." Dewdrop stood her ground. "Without spring, the world cannot survive. The flowers, the animals, the people, they all depend on its return." Frostbane leaned closer, his icy breath chilling Dewdrop to the bone. "And why should I care? I was cast aside for centuries, ignored while the world celebrated warmth and life. Now, winter will reign eternal." Dewdrop's heart ached as she listened to Frostbane's words. Beneath his anger, she sensed a deep loneliness. Holding the Bloomstone tightly, she stepped closer. Its warmth began to radiate through the chamber, melting small patches of frost on the walls. "I understand your pain," she said gently, "but stealing spring won't fill the emptiness inside you. It will only bring more sorrow to the world, and to you." Frostbane flinched, as though her words had struck a nerve. His icy form shimmered uncertainly. "You know nothing of my pain," he growled, though his voice was softer now. Dewdrop took another step forward, the Bloomstone glowing brighter. "I know what it's like to feel alone. My father, the king, passed away when I was very young. He loved the flowers, and after he was gone, they seemed to lose their color. But I realized that sharing his memory with others kept his spirit alive. You don't have to be alone, Frostbane. Let me help you." The ice giant stared at her, his glowing eyes flickering. For a moment, the chamber was silent, except for the faint hum of the Bloomstone. Then Frostbane roared, his massive hands clutching his head. Cracks spread across his icy form, as if her words had broken through the layers of frost encasing him. Dewdrop held the Bloomstone high. Its warmth filled the chamber, melting the chains around the orb of spring. The green and gold light grew brighter, swirling with renewed energy. As the chains shattered, spring burst free, filling the room with the scent of fresh blossoms and the gentle warmth of a sunlit meadow. Frostbane collapsed to his knees, his icy exterior melting away to reveal a sorrowful figure beneath. No longer a towering giant, but a tired, weathered being with soft, pale features. Tears, warm and clear, streamed down his face. "I was blinded by my bitterness," he whispered. "I thought winter was the only way to ease my pain, but I see now that I was wrong." Dewdrop stepped forward and placed a hand on his trembling shoulder. "It's not too late to make amends. Winter has its place, just as spring does. Balance is what keeps the world alive." Frostbane nodded slowly, his expression softening. "You are wise, little princess. Thank you for reminding me of what I had forgotten." With Frostbane's blessing, Dewdrop carried the orb of spring out of the fortress. As she descended the mountain, the blizzard began to clear and patches of green emerged from beneath the snow. Flowers began to bloom, their vibrant colors spreading across the landscape like paint on a blank canvas. Birds returned to the skies, and the warmth of spring melted the lingering chill. At the base of the mountain, the snowy fox awaited her, its bright eyes gleaming with approval. "You've done it, princess. Spring is free and balance has been restored." Dewdrop smiled, her heart swelling with pride and relief. "I couldn't have done it without you." When Dewdrop returned to the Kingdom of Blossoms, she was greeted with cheers and laughter. The flowers were blooming once more, their petals glistening with dew. Lady Poppy embraced her tightly, tears of joy in her eyes. "You've saved us, my dear," she said. "The Kingdom of Blossoms will remember your bravery for generations." Dewdrop looked out at the vibrant fields, her heart full of gratitude. She had faced her fears, melted an icy heart, and restored life to her home. And though she was still a young princess, she knew she had grown stronger and wiser. As she stood among the blooming flowers, the warmth of spring on her skin, Dewdrop smiled. She was ready for whatever adventures the future might bring.